All right, so if you just joined, we're just talking about Pico CSS, minimalist CSS framework, and we're going to demonstrate how to use it on a little app that I used for a lecture that I gave last week for Coding with Kali. Coding with Kali is a similar thing to what we do here with Web Dev Fundamentals. It's free. You can join weekly, and you can basically work on a real live application with a developer named Kali. She runs the whole thing. So just coding-with-kali.com, Callie is how you spell Kali. I can put the link in the chat. But anyway, so typically I do a lecture. Today we're just kind of like talking about stuff. But if anybody has questions, let me know in the chat and I'd be happy to go over answers to those questions. It can be anything technical, whatever, just AMA style. I don't really care. But if you have any career questions or technical questions, learning questions, curious about what direction to take or anything like that, let me know. All right, cool. So let's talk about Pico a little bit. So basically, you can download the file directly from here, this link, and you can install it locally with just linking a style sheet. So include it in your CSS folder, or you can use the CDN just to get it up and running really quickly. Once you have it included, immediately all of your HTML is going to become styled. It's going to look way nicer than it would by default. So let's just go show an example of that before I show you the other app, which is like this to-do app. It's already using Pico, but let's go. Actually, you know what? Let's go do that now because there's not much more to it. Like there are some things with the layout where you can add like a container and you can use a grid and stuff like that, and that's cool. And then with the forms, it kind of shows you what it all looks like. But really, there's not anything that you have to add other than just adding the CSS file and the style sheet, and if you want to do a layout, you can add like a container or container fluid based on whether or not you want it to take up the full screen or you want it to have some margins. Okay, so let's jump over to this app, and then it is a Node app, so let's go ahead and just run it. And then we'll open this in the browser. Okay, cool. So this is it. This is the styling. Make sure this is turned off. Nope, did not mean to click that. Okay, turn that off. Cool. All right, so this is default styling with Pico, which it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it definitely makes your app, if you're just bootstrapping something together, building something really quickly, trying to do like a proof of concept or a short spike on whatever task, it can be a good way to not just have disgusting looking HTML by itself. So let's see what that looks like without it. So go ahead and open this up. Move this, close all these, open that up, go here. Somewhere in here there's going to be a boilerplate. Cool. So you can actually see here that inside of my HTML, all I had to do to get Pico working was include this one line. And that is the CDN for JS Deliver, Pico CSS, blah, blah. You just get that from the website, plug it in, you're good to go. Again, you can, oh yeah, I can actually show you something about that in a second. So someone in the chat said, I need to learn those quick, short ways to close tabs and all that to make my development faster. Yeah, the faster you get with your keyboard, what do they say? The less your hands leave your keyboard, the better. For a couple reasons, for speed and productivity, but also for ergonomics. Like constantly using your mouse, for some people, will jack up their shoulder. For me, especially, even with the ergonomic mouse with the wheel or whatever. Okay, so this style sheet is all you need. Blow that up a little bit. So what happens when we comment it out? This is just an HTML comment for those of you that don't know. You just wrap whatever piece of HTML code in this syntax and that syntax, and the editor here is indicating to us that it is a comment by making it green. So basically that just means that the HTML is going to ignore that line of code, and therefore this program, this application, is no longer going to make use of this CDN, this style sheet that gives us the Pico CSS library. Okay, so with all that, we'll go ahead and run this and refresh. This is what it looks like without Pico. So traditionally, if you're just building something really quickly and you're really focused on like the back end side of things, or even the front end, if you're trying to work with like a library like React or whatever, then you're going to have something like this until you add Tailwind or until you add Bootstrap or until you write your own custom CSS. And so it's not going to look super great. And so that's the benefit of Pico, is that you literally just include the CDN or download the style sheet and include it locally within your CSS files, link to it that way. Which in that case, you would literally just have a folder within your project called CSS, and you would link to it, CSS folder picomin.css. So we're using the CDN, Content Delivery Network, which is just a server out there on the internet that has this file. And the nice thing about using a CDN is great for development, but even if you just didn't care and you used it in production on a smaller website, the benefit of that, of course, would be that that file could potentially already be cached on someone else's computer or phone or tablet. And so if it's already cached, then you're saving them some bandwidth, and also it's going to load potentially quicker. All right, so since we included it, now if we refresh, voila, here it is. So again, Pico CSS, it's not like Bootstrap, it's not like Tailwind in that you can do all these crazy positioning of elements or anything like that. If you need those things, then you need to include a more robust framework. What it will give you, however, is just a much nicer looking styling. And this can be just for bootstrapping something really quickly. And when I say the term bootstrapping, I'm not referring to the Bootstrap CSS framework. I'm just meaning throwing something together really quickly and have it look half decent, especially if you need to focus on some logic and some backend functionality, but you still need to show it to a potential employer or something like that. Then this can be a good way to achieve that. So yeah, that's it, Pico CSS. So that's one cool thing to talk about. Again, if you're just joining, basically this is office hours. It's not a formal lecture. We just got done talking about Pico CSS and why you may find it useful in your development workflow. The next thing I want to talk about is someone just mentioned in the comments, which is being able to memorize keyboard shortcuts and increase your productivity. And I'll show you some cool stuff. So the next thing we'll talk about is Vimium, and then one other thing in VS Code to help you increase your productivity. All right, so I'm on Windows. So I'm fairly familiar with the different shortcuts on Windows, to change between programs. So right now I'm in Microsoft Edge, my browser. If I went to, Alt-Tab over to my code editor, VS Code, then I can do that. Now you'll notice that right now I currently have a terminal on the bottom half and a code editor or code file on the top half of the screen. So I know the shortcut to toggle my terminal. That's great, because I can just get it out of my way, and then immediately there's my cursor, and I can start moving around and changing things here. Now, if you know Vim, you can install Vim for VS Code, which gives you all the Vim keyboard shortcuts, which will make you way faster. I like using Vim by itself, and I like using VS Code by itself. I haven't really integrated the two, but at some point I will take the time to do that. But the benefit there is that you can just jump around between lines. So I think actually in VS Code, if you Control G, and let's say we've got a file with hundreds of lines of code, and let's say you got an error message and it says the error is on line 92 or something. In this case, I only have 34 lines, but I could say, okay, I need to go to line 30, and immediately it's going to focus my cursor down here on line 30. So for me on Windows, it's Control G. You have to look up what the keyboard shortcut is if you're on Mac or whatever. But just look up whatever they call this. Let's see, current line character. The great thing about VS Code is everything is included in the command palette. So from here, you could say go to line, literally just start typing it, and as soon as it identifies it, it tells you, oh, on your computer it's Control G, and then if you don't know the shortcut or you haven't memorized it yet, you just can, in my case, Control Shift P to open up the palette, the command palette, start typing out whatever command you're looking for, and then enter, and now I'm there, wherever Control G would take me to. And so I can say, okay, take me to line 2, press enter, and now my cursor is up here on line 2. So then being able to, one thing I see a lot of people do, beginners especially, is if they need to move some code around, they'll be like, oh, I need to move this line of code. So they'll select it with their mouse, and then they'll Control X to cut it, and then they'll go down, and then they might Control V to paste it, or they might right click and paste it like that. You don't have to do all that. You can literally just put your cursor on that line, and then in my case, I think it's Alt up and down. So you can see I'm moving it around through this file. And that's it, just Alt up and down. So again, if you're on Mac, you're gonna figure out what that keyboard shortcut is, but duplicating file or duplicating lines, if I wanted multiple of these, you can do that. If you're familiar with Emmet and you're writing HTML, that can be a great way to save time. So you're like, oh, I need a main tag, and inside the main I need a div, and inside the div I need a P, and next to the P I need another div, and then you tab it out, and like, boom, you have all your syntax. And that just uses CSS selectors. So that's called Emmet, E-M-M-E-T. You can find it at emmet.io. It comes by default with VS Code. So if you didn't know that, in your HTML files, or in my case, my EJS file, which is embedded JavaScript, is just HTML with JavaScript on the back end for like Node.js or other back-end JavaScript frameworks, then you can include Emmet that way. Okay, so yeah, all that to say, if you know shortcuts and you begin to memorize them, and I know people like write them down, they'll put them on their wall behind their monitor, whatever you need to do, or you can use the command palette and you can search for the thing that you want and just memorize the shortcut next to it. Not everything has a shortcut, so there may be times where you actually have to set a shortcut, and you can do that inside of your settings. So the shortcut for settings for me is Control comma. Again, you can just go to File and go down to Preferences and then go to Settings, but you can see here Control plus comma. And so then you go through here and you say, okay, I want to change whatever it is. And so you go find your keyboard shortcuts and you do them that way. I think keyboard shortcuts are in here. I could be wrong. Oh, they're actually here, Control K, Control S. So Control K, well, if we close it, don't save it. Control K, Control S brings up your keyboard shortcuts, or you can find it through the File menu, and then you go Preferences, Keyboard Shortcuts. So in here, you just go through, and you can filter it down, fortunately, and just find the thing that you want. So you're like, okay, I want to add a line comment. So you search for that. Oh, sure enough, there it is. Okay, it already has a key binding. So then you just learn that key binding for whatever this thing is, adding a line comment. Or if you don't like that, then you click on the key binding, or double click, and then here it's waiting for you to put in a new key, and you just do that. I clicked outside of it, so it would cancel it. But double click on the key binding, you press the keys that you want it to listen for, it'll tell you if they're going to work, or if there's a conflict with an existing key binding for a different command, and then you just figure it out from there. But if you get one that's not already being used, then you can press enter, it'll work. All right, cool. So keyboard shortcuts, super important, save you lots of time, and you can do things like show me my file system, go to my extensions, search for an extension. So the more keyboard shortcuts you learn and memorize, the less your hands have to come off the keyboard and touch your mouse, things like that, and you'll be faster. So if I'm like, oh, I want to jump from here over to here, and then normally you think, oh, I want to click on this link right here, so I have to use my mouse. So now your hand is going away from the keyboard, grabbing the mouse, and going over here and clicking on one of these links. Well, there's actually something called Vimium. And so you can look up Vimium for Chrome. I'm on Edge, so you can just look it up for Edge, or you could just install it from here. It doesn't matter. So Vimium, super awesome tool, but basically it's Vim keyboard shortcuts. If you're not familiar with Vim, it's just another code editor / can be turned into like an IDE sort of thing that you run directly from your terminal. And a lot of people that use those kinds of editors like Vim or Emacs or whatever, Nano, they memorize all these shortcuts, their fingers never leave the keyboard, and they get really fast. We'll talk more about Vim in a second since it relates to this, but there's like games and stuff that you can play to help you learn those shortcuts, just to make it more fun than like literally just going, oh, it's, what is that? What is that? The thing about Vim, and really any of this stuff, is you just make a habit out of it. So every time you go to touch the mouse, you remind yourself, no, there's a shortcut for that. What was that shortcut? And if you can't recall it, then just find it and then practice it a couple times, and then next time see if you can recall it again. And so over time, you form that habit, and it just becomes second nature. You don't even think about it. And then you just pick it up a piece at a time. You're not going to become a Vim expert overnight, but if you remember, Oh yeah, the HJKL keys are the ones that help me go up and down. And if I press I, it's going to go into insert mode. And if I press escape, it'll take me out. If I do colon, I can write a command. If I do W, it's for write. Whatever. You just learn those one by one and start using them over time. And the more you use it, the quicker you'll become proficient with it. So what is this Vimium all about? Well, Vimium takes Vim shortcuts, which make it to where you don't have to leave the keyboard with your hands, and it brings them into the browser. So basically any page I'm on, like the Pico CSS, I just press F one time, and all of a sudden it highlights everything with these little alpha characters. And so it's like, hey, if you wanted to click on customization over here, all you'd have to do is press E. So I press E, and it opens it up. And it was already open, so it truncated. So F, okay, I want Sass, so I go DE. Takes me to Sass. Okay, I want that link directly in the center of the screen, this one. So I just press F, and it's D, and it's still waiting because there's several different ones that start with D, and then the second letter is P. Press P, boom, takes me to the Sass website. And then of course, if you know your keyboard shortcuts for your browser, then you can just do like Control W to close it. And in fact, I'm pretty sure Vimium includes keyboard shortcuts. So I think like maybe T opens a new tab, whereas traditionally you'd have to do like Control T. But now that you have Vimium, you just press T and it gives you a new tab. And I don't know if M gives you a new window. No, it does some sort of query thing. Anyway, so you just go to Vimium, just like Vim. You go through, you figure out which keys are mapped to what, and you just memorize them over time. So that's this extension here. You can actually exclude Vimium for specific pages in case you have a conflict. Maybe you have a website that already has a bunch of keyboard shortcuts like listeners for keyboard key presses, and you don't want it to conflict with that. Then you just exclude Vimium keys for that specific website. All types of stuff you can do in the options. And then, of course, they have links to documentation and all that stuff. Cool. So, yeah, super powerful. The main thing that I use it for is just the F, so I can just click on things. Okay, I want to go up to docs. I press C, takes me to docs. Oh, I want to go to the install with npm as. Okay, there it is. Now I'm at install with npm. Oh, I want to go over to this @use W, and so never leaving the keyboard, just moving around really quickly, or never having to put your hand on your mouse. Definitely increases productivity. Vimium exists for Mac. So someone mentioned Home Row is for the entire desktop. So in addition to Vimium, HomeRow.app, and I think this is a paid app. It's like a couple bucks. But so Vimium is for the browser. You can use it. You can install it for Chrome, for Edge, for Brave, whatever you prefer. I don't know why this website is taking so long to load, but HomeRow gives you the power of Vim across your entire user interface. So yes, super sweet that there's an app like that for Mac, to where you don't ever have to touch your mouse. Like literally, if you're on Mac, and you already should know things like, for example, on Windows, I just press the Win key, and then I can like search for stuff. Oh, if I want to go to Photoshop, I just PH, and now there's Photoshop. Whereas on Mac, it comes with Spotlight, which is like Command Enter or something. Their website's down. But anyway, HomeRow is, whenever their website comes back up, it gives you Vim keys on Mac. There's another one for Windows. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Yeah, definitely, no problem. The other thing that I would recommend if you're on Mac has so many cool tools. I wish I had a Mac right now, but one day soon I'll get a Mac. So there's something called, and there's way better ones. I'm like not familiar with all the best ones, but the one I used to use was called, oh gosh, Alfred. So it's a productivity app for Mac. I barely used it for, yes, someone is saying they love Alfred. So you can use the free version. It's like Spotlight on steroids, but then there's also a ton of stuff you can add on top of it for the Power Pack and the workflows and all this cool stuff. I don't even use all this stuff. When I used to have a Mac, I didn't use any of that stuff, and I still loved it because you could navigate to a website just by a couple keyboard, button clicks, and you could use a calculator You could open any application, switch between applications, whatever you needed. Super easy. Just press a couple keys and you're there. Yep, Alfred's great. So yeah, any other productivity applications or tools, let us know in the comments over here or in the chat. Let me think about what else. I feel like, oh, okay, something I was going to mention was, you may have noticed, like if you do use your mouse, so it's nice to be able to, okay, I need this, and I get that, and then that, and I go over to this file, and then from here I just type some code, and then I go run it down here, blah, 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 and that, oh, I want to go over to the file editor, okay, there's that. So you can do it all with your keyboard. But there's another extension that I installed recently it's like kind of annoying, but also kind of super useful, and it's called Auto Hide. And so Auto Hide is a tool to auto hide the sidebar in the terminal panel. So sidebar being this area, terminal being this area, terminal, sidebar. And so what happens is if you're editing code and you click on the file, it automatically hides everything else. So you immediately go into focus mode, not the true focus mode, which I think is under view or whatever. Appearance, where's Zen? There's Zen mode. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. So Zen mode is like, you don't see any of the sidebar stuff, which is nice. And then I don't know how to get out of it. We're stuck in Zen mode forever. So I think I just used F11 to toggle full screen and that fixed it. But anyway, so yeah, then what you have to do is if you want to get your editor back, you have to either go up here and click on these buttons, or you just have to know the shortcuts. So for me, I can do this one for terminal. For me, it's Control Backtick. And then the other one's Control K, Control B, opens up the side. It's already on extensions, but I can go to my files, Control Shift E, so on and so forth. So that's kind of cool on Auto Hide. Definitely, especially if you're doing stuff like I do with live video, it can be helpful. All right, any questions? Y'all let me know in the chat. I'm here for another 27 minutes, so I'm happy to answer anything y'all have got. Also interested to know what people are working on or where you are in your development journey. If you just started, if you've been doing it for a while, if you're already working, if you're looking for a job, if it's just a hobby. I'm always interested to know this sort of thing because that helps me better understand my audience and better provide content and whatever else may be useful to you all. Also, this app that we're looking at is using HTMX. I did it, I think my third web dev fundamentals was on HTMX. And then I did one last week. But if anybody wants to demo it, wants me to demo it, right now, if you're not familiar with HTMX and you want to learn what it is, more than happy to do that. I love HTMX. I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So if y'all are interested, let me know in the chat and I'll demo it for you real quick. Also, if anybody's interested in like a certain framework or language that you haven't used before, like if you're a JavaScript developer and you're like, man, I've always wondered about Ruby, Ruby on Rails, or Python Django, or Python Flask, or Ruby Sinatra, or whatever, let me know. I'm happy to kind of show you at a high level a little bit about those. If you're like, man, I've always thought about maybe, you know, dipping my feet into a certain technology stack or whatever. If I'm familiar with it, I'm happy to talk about it. The little indicator on the chat is so misleading. It's like someone is typing, you wait and you wait and you wait, and then they stop typing and nothing comes up. Press send. Just do it. Okay, good. This is a great question. Is React hard to learn if I'm not a pro JS user? No, not at all. React is pretty easy. Here's the thing about React. Just it's like similar to the concept I was describing with Vim. Like with Vim, and this applies to like everything in learning actually. Like if you're learning a new language, you're not just gonna like get a list of, you know, all however many tens of thousands of vocabulary words and just like memorize it overnight and the next day wake up and start speaking that language. You're going to learn the fundamentals, right? Like learn about the syntax and the grammar and the structure and everything. And then you're going to learn the some of the terms and some of the key phrases, and then you're going to have to use them. And if and your brain's not going to actually create those like neural pathways and like strengthen them and make it to where information travels more quickly between them until you do it over and over again. So you like with everything, you have to create a habit. And so with Vim, you're not going to learn all the shortcuts. You have to do them like one at a time or a couple at a time, and just as needed. It's always like as a necessity. So you're like, okay, I need to do X, Y, Z. So how do I do that with Vim? So then you learn, and then you're like, okay, well that's something I do all the time. And so now you replace what you were doing previously with your mouse. Now you're doing it with the keyboard. Okay, so let's jump over to React. Again, you're going to learn the fundamentals, which is not a lot, by the way. You can go through that tutorial today as soon as we're done talking here. React documentation is a great place to start. I'll show you that in a second. And once you understand the fundamentals, then you just like build something basic. If you already have an existing application, especially if it's a simple one, then you could just refactor it to use React. Or what you could do is you could just build a to-do app. I know it's like cliche and it's not super interesting. So if you wanted to, you could change it from like being a to-do app to an app that lets you create whatever characters from your favorite video game or your favorite book or movie or something like that. So if you want Harry Potter or Pokemon, I don't know, I'm old, so those are things that we used to do. But the more you do it, the more familiar you'll become with it, the easier it'll be. Not that it's not easy to start out with, but it's going to take repetition and it's going to take a habit. So you just have to do it. If you put it down, you'll get atrophy, you'll forget, you don't use it, you're not going to learn it. So you just have to pick it up, have some fun with it, build some things. You're going to learn a lot. And then even then, you're not going to know everything, because until you get into a project that really requires you to use some of the more complex side of the React ecosystem, then you're just not going to experience those things. So let's jump over to the React docs real quick so I can show you. You could actually just go straight to quick start. Is my internet like busted? Why are none of these websites loading? There's no way the React website is down. Does any of this stuff work? This website works. There's got to be something going on right now with like AWS servers. Look at this. Look at either that. I don't know. This is strange. Because I mean, you all can hear me, so my internet is working fine. Okay, well, whatever that website I tried to show you earlier, the homero.app, check that one out whenever you might. Maybe it works on your end, but on my end it's not working. And then react.dev, I'm super surprised that this website's not loading. Let's see if we can get this to work in a different browser. Weird. So strange. All right, cool. Well, there is a get started, quick start, whatever tutorial on react.dev, and it's great. It's easy to follow. So the next thing we'll go to, if YouTube's working, we'll find out, is a video that I created recently. Just if you haven't seen it, go ahead and pause this. Videos, it's gonna be down here somewhere. This one right here. I'll put this in this link in the chat. And basically, I had this app called Time Between. Super simple app, which by the way, it's pretty gross looking. I should add Pico, right? Literally just add, I think if you just go settings and then you go CSS and then you go here and you search for Pico and you click it and you click close. Oh, it's not, oh, there it is. Immediately changes your application. That looks better. Yeah, I would put a container around it. This div right here. I'm getting distracted, sorry. But so the moment you put a container around it, then it kind of like puts things in the center. All right, so anyway, I have this app and it's written in vanilla JavaScript, and it's like, it's nothing crazy. It's like 37 lines of code. But it's a small app and it uses JavaScript with HTML. And so I thought, oh, I will refactor it to use React. And I don't have the link to that one presently, so let me go find it. Oh gosh, I have to log in. I don't know my password. Nice, got it on the first try. Okay, so pens. Let's do a search for time between. Here we go. I have multiple React refactors. I don't know which one is which, but we'll just go with the first one and see what happens. Okay, cool. So look at this. The HTML went down to one line. Why is that? Oh, thanks for the subscription. Appreciate that. It went down to one line because we mount onto a single element in our HTML, and then all the rest of the markup HTML is provided through React. So yes, there's more lines of code. I think it went from like 35 to 80, but that's because we moved all of our HTML into this syntax here, which is called JSX, and it allows us to write JavaScript on top of the HTML and create all this dynamic stuff. So that video goes over this refactor right here, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, check it out. It's just, the whole point of the video is just to be like, hey, learning React is not difficult. Like literally you could watch that video and you could kind of understand some concepts. Hopefully I explained them well. But then you go to react.dev and you do the quick start and you'll very quickly learn the fundamentals. So then to answer your question more succinctly, do you have to be a pro.js developer to learn React? No. You do need to understand the fundamentals of JavaScript. I mean, you could technically, like a lot of these frameworks allow you to just use them without any knowledge of the language underneath. Like you could use Rails without knowing Ruby. It's just gonna be harder. So like you can use React without knowing JavaScript, but the more you know about the underlying language that a framework or library is built on, the easier it's gonna be for you to learn that library or framework and debug things. And not just that, but to understand at a deeper level what's going on. So if you understand JavaScript and just simple stuff, like if you know what a for loop is and what a .map function is and what a variable is, variable assignment and ternary operators and if statements and control flow and for loops, stuff like that, then you're good to go. Then you're ready to start learning React. All right, so the next question, have you tried Livewire? Is it good or it's better to use JS frameworks? So Livewire is a Laravel thing, right? So building modern web apps is hard. Tools like Vue and React are extremely powerful, but the complexity they add to the full stack developer's workflow is insane. It doesn't have to be this way. Say hello to Livewire. Livewire is a full stack framework for Laravel that makes building a dynamic interfaces simple. So this is what HTMX does. So in my experience, I've just used HTMX. Because you can use it with anything, including Laravel. But this is sick because it's built into Laravel, or it's built on top of Laravel. So let's look at some code. Here's a real-time search component built with Livewire. Because they're using real-time search, I'm going to compare this to HTMX in a second. But basically, this is a great thing about programming, by the way. If you know one language, like you can look at what we have here, and there's going to be some syntax that you're like, wait, what is that? But it still should be fairly simple to determine what's going on here just by like the contextual kind of overall message that the code is conveying, regardless of whether or not you actually know PHP, which by the way, Laravel web framework is built on PHP. Okay, so this is saying use Livewire component. Okay, so use. There's a file out there somewhere called component, or there's a module, I should say. And it's being exported in such a way that we can import it here. So export, import, the term import from like JavaScript, if you're coming from JavaScript or some other languages that use that terminology, the concept here use is the same thing. So then we have a class. If you know anything about classes from other languages, this should be very similar. But basically search users class is the name of the class that we're defining right here. And it extends this thing called component, which by the way is what we brought up here. So we brought in this thing called component as a class, and we're extending it with search users. So search users inherits everything from components. So search users is a component, right? It's a custom component. And so then you have this public field variable. So $ in PHP indicates a variable. So think of this as just like the const or let keyword sort of, but this is a public indicator on this class, making this a public field. Doesn't really matter, but the point here is that we have a variable called search on this class. And then we have a function, so it's a public function. This just means that these things are accessible outside the class. They're not private. Okay, so we have this function called render, which by the way, this looks just like JavaScript, right? We have function keyword, we have the name of the function, we have open close parentheses. They put those curly brackets on the next line, which I'm not a huge fan of, but just imagine that this curly bracket is right here. So then they have a return keyword, and then they have another function called view, which appears to be a built-in thing. And then the first argument is going to be the location of the view. So if we're thinking of views in MVC, model view controller, view is going to be the template layer where our HTML files live, or perhaps a like a blade file in the case of Laravel, or an EJS file in the case of Express.js or handlebars or whatever. There's always different template languages, but in this case it's saying, hey, inside of a folder called Livewire, there's a or maybe it's coming from a component, I'm not sure, but anyway, there's a search users view, and so we are returning that view, and then we're passing some context into it. We're passing some local variables into it. So this square bracket syntax here might throw you off a little bit, because in JavaScript and Python and other languages that have dictionary object like data structures, they use curly brackets to indicate them, but in PHP this is called an associative array. It's not actually an array, it's an array with key value pairs. So essentially it's a JavaScript object, or it's a Python dictionary. And so they use square bracket syntax, but look at this. They have a key that points to a value. So if you have a key value pair, then basically just like an object in JavaScript. All right, so they're saying, hey, return this search users, and it's going to have this variable called users, which this is the Livewire part right here. This is dope, right? It goes user where username this search get. So basically it's just saying like, hey, find me the users where the username field is whatever this search returns. Okay, so then if we go look at the actual search users.blade, which by the way, this is this livewire.search users. Look here, Livewire search users inside the views directory. You don't have to put blade PHP, you just literally say, hey, return this view. It finds it right here, and this is what it's returning. And it's saying, hey, pass in users. Sure enough, there it is. Because it's PHP, the users variable, which is derived from the key in this associative array, is available via this $ variable name. So then, for each, looks just like JavaScript, right? Sort of. JavaScript, we say array.forEach. In this case, they have this blade syntax, which says at for each, thing that we're doing a for each over, thing that lives inside this code block for each element in the array. So in the users collection for each user, we have access to these user objects which have a username property. And so in this unordered list, we're just going to iterate over all of our users and print out their usernames inside the list items. So then this part right here, on this input right here, this search input, wire : model. So this is the Livewire thing, where it's like search is, and then you see, look at this search, and then you just type text in here, and what does it do? It passes it up to the component as username, which it then uses to search through the user model, which is this capital U user, and it's saying, hey, find all users where the username matches what's inside this search. So this is interesting. This component, right? This keyword is pointing to the search users component instance wherever it's being used. Okay, so then we have this right here, and because it's all hooked up, this input right here has this search thing on the wire model, which gives us access to its value here. So it's this search is connected to this search, which then gets used in this to get the users, to pass it back down into here to be rendered. This is not a lot of code for what would otherwise be a potentially fairly complex interface. And so then you can include this component anywhere in your app, so you can reuse this wherever you want. Okay, so how the heck does it work? First of all, when a user types into the search input, the list of users updates in real time. Wild. Okay. Livewire renders the initial component output with the page, like a blade include. That's just part of the template syntax for the blade template engine. This way it's SEO friendly. So initial component output with the page. So that's where it starts at. But then when the interaction occurs, Livewire makes AJAX requests to the server with the updated data. The server re-renders the component and responds with the new HTML. This is important. Responds with new HTML. Livewire then intelligently mutates the DOM according to the change to the things that changed. So all in all, it's basically saying like, hey, between these two blocks of code here, the template and the controller, or wherever this is living, between this logic layer and this view layer, we are initially loading the page. And so this gets called, and it should return all users. And then as you start interacting with the input, it's going to send the text from the input to the server available through this search, and it's going to update. And so, by the way, the reason actually, you know, in this particular case, they say public search is equal to an empty string. So the first time this gets run, it's not going to return any users because it's going to try to match username on an empty string. And so initially, you'll just get an input with nothing below it, just an empty unordered list. And then as you start typing, then it's going to start populating. So this is really cool, super powerful. This could save you tons of time if obviously you need to take the time to learn Laravel and then this fairly easy syntax for Livewire. But like if you're building SaaS stuff or just like side projects, things that you want to build for yourself or even for a larger company, this could save you a ton of time. And that's like the whole benefit of frameworks to begin with. But why is this super beneficial? The reason it's super beneficial is because of what they talk about down here. And that is because Livewire is handling the AJAX requests, asynchronous JavaScript and XML, or these days it's JSON. It may not even, yeah. So it's basically sending a request with the form body to that route, calls that component, passes in the data, and then it sends back HTML. And then Livewire gets that HTML and it identifies where it needs to replace it. And so what happens is as opposed to like a monolithic, we'll say traditional web application that you would learn how to build in like a coding bootcamp or self-taught tutorials, things like that, before you get to something like React and you're just working with a backend framework, with the templating language, in this case, Blade with Laravel or embedded, or what is it, ERB with Ruby, I think, EJS with JavaScript, handlebars, whatever. There's a ton of different ones. So anyway, when you submit a form or you type into an input, it sends the request to the backend. The backend sends a response, but that response is a whole new page. So then the browser gets that and it loads the new page. And so you have this very like send and then like kind of a blink or like a redirect flash and then new page loads. And like if you're scrolled down here and like let's just say that this little input was the search bar and you start typing and it's supposed to update something up there, it would reload the whole page and send you to the top. That's not super great for UX, user experience. What you would want is as you're typing or when you press submit or whatever, that it just updates right here, regardless if your scroll is here, if your scroller is here, whatever. If your scroll bar is anywhere, it's not going to take you back to the very top on the page reload. So let's go look at HTMX. Good segue with the last couple minutes that we have. Examples. And we'll go down to active search. So look at this. Search contacts. There's a loading indicator because that's built into HTMX. Pretty dope. Here's your input. Couple little HTMX attributes. Sorry for the helicopter flying over if y'all can hear it. These are what hook up your form or your input to HTMX, and then when you submit it or when a specific trigger happens, in this case the trigger is an input, whenever the input has changed, then there's a 500 millisecond delay that just creates an effect called debalancing, just to make sure that you're not getting raised conditions, sending too many requests at the same time, and then getting some wonky output. So all that to say, you have your table here, which is the same thing as the unordered list that we were looking at a second ago. Okay, cool. So basically, look at this. Page first loads. This is exactly what they were talking about here. Where'd it go? Page first loads, searches an empty string, searches an empty string, empty table. In the case of Livewire, empty unordered list. Okay, and then you start typing. So you say B, and that half a second, 500 milliseconds. So it waited, and then it said, okay, there's a change. Go ahead and submit it. And then now we got everything with B. And so I'm like, okay, well, I know that there's some .co.uk's here for the emails. So you'll notice I'm scrolled halfway down the page. It didn't take me to the top, didn't refresh, anything like that. All it did was it updated the data within this table with all results for contacts whose emails end in .co.uk. So then we say, okay, what about last name Cash? Oh, there's only one person with last name Cash. Is there anybody here named Ben? There's no one here named Ben, but there's a Ruben, and there's someone over here with a Lacus Etienne Bibben. There's a Ben in there. So same feature, very little code. Look, these are both very similar, very little code. And so this is only the front end implementation with HTMX. Livewire is the front end implementation with the corresponding component on the back end. Then you can use that component anywhere you want. So pretty sick. I would say 50-50. Go with either one. If you're building with Laravel, you don't have to use HTMX with it. You could totally use Livewire. There's other, like, this concept is not new, by the way. So like Ruby on Rails has something called Turbo Links, maybe. So TurboLinks JavaScript library makes navigating your web application faster. When you follow a link, TurboLinks automatically fetches the page and swaps it in. So this is kind of the same thing. It makes it seem like it's really fast because you click on a link, and then rather than getting the redirect, getting the HTML, and then like letting the browser refresh to the new page or load the new page, it does it all in the background and just replaces everything inside the body for you, or everything inside the HTML for you. So TurboLinks, there's another thing though, it's called Hot something or other. I forget what it's called, but it's another similar concept where basically you're getting these like super smooth user interface interactions without having to use a front-end framework. So they're built on top of these back-end frameworks. So Django's got one or more. So a lot of these are like built in so they can be integrated with the various frameworks. But yeah, so HTMX is the one that I've been turned on to recently and have been using a bit, but there's lots of other ones that are similar. So then someone asked, is HTMX similar to Alpine? So this will be our last question, since I'm going to make sure and be respectful of everybody's time. We're almost at the top of the hour, but Alpine can be used in basically complementary to HTMX. So what Alpine lets you do, and I don't know all of its things that it lets you do because I haven't used it, but as far as I understand, rather than writing JavaScript inside of a script, a separate file or an internal script or whatever, you just use, similar to how HTMX gives you all these HTML attributes, you just write HTML attributes onto your existing HTML elements, and it allows you to write JavaScript that way without actually having to write JavaScript. So, for example, this has this X data, and then it creates this object. And this object has a key message, which is a symbol, and a this little string value, I, emoji, heart, Alpine. And then X text is equal to message. So what should happen here is that where is it? Oh, okay. Sorry. It's telling us we should bring this over to, like, you could just do it locally, or we'll just do it in CodePen. So let me just create a new pen real quick. paste this in the way that, okay, so it works right out of the gate. So if this works, then you've included it properly. So like inside this H1, first of all, what you'll notice is we didn't put anything here. And so Alpine said, hey, the inner text of this H1 element is now defined by this x-text attribute. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. So I broke it. So it's saying x text, and then what you do is you provide it this key for this x data. So if this key is message, so then we change this to something else, and that'll break it. And now we should see anything here when it reloads, or it just doesn't show anything because it can't find message. So then we say something else, and it's back. So it's ignoring what's inside of the H1, and it's opting to use this combination here. So we provide it some data via the attribute, and then we just tell it the text value for this specific element is going to be derived from the key, whatever key we put here, from this xData object. So that is like super bare bones, simple, but there's so much more you can do with it. So they have all these different, what they're calling directives, and if you come from something like Angular, then directives probably sounds familiar to you. I think maybe Lit uses directives also, but you can do like an if statement. I'm sure you can do some looping. Yeah, there's a for. So like here, look at this. This will be the last thing we look at. We have this loop that's outputting red, orange, yellow. And so if you look, unordered list has an attribute xData, colors key is pointing to an array of strings, red, orange, yellow. Then we have this template with a list item. The template says x for color and colors. So here's our for loop. It recognizes that the parent element has this thing called colors. So there's colors, and it uses this color and colors syntax for a for loop. And therefore the parent element, or sorry, the child element, list item, can now replace its text. Look here, there's no text in between the open and closed list item tags, with the value assigned to the color variable from the loop, which is derived from the colors list or array in this data object. So pretty cool. Didn't have to write a single line of JavaScript, just did it all directly in the HTML. So if you just have some really simple use cases for getting data into your application, and you don't want to have to wire up React, or you don't want to have to wire up some vanilla JavaScript or jQuery or whatever the heck it is you're using, then Alpine can probably make your workflow a lot easier. And you can use Alpine in tandem with something like HTMX or even Livewire to be able to, when you need JavaScript, like these libraries like HTMX, make it to where you don't have to use JavaScript most of the time. But occasionally you are going to need to use JavaScript. And so when you do need to use JavaScript, you don't have to put it in a script. You can just bring in something like Alpine and also include that inside of the HTML element as an attribute. Cool. So that has been our office hours for today. Thank you everyone who showed up. Appreciate y'all for sticking around. If you have any follow-up questions, please find me in the Discord server. Send me a direct message, however you want. Find me on LinkedIn. Find me on YouTube. Send me a comment. Let me know what you need help with or what you have a question about, and I'll be sure to address that. So thanks again, everybody, and look forward to seeing you all again next week, Wednesday, same time, 1 p.m. Central, for either office hours or a lecture on a web development fundamental concept. See y'all next time.